Welcome in to RJ Bell's Dream Preview, MLB Major League Baseball edition. I am your host, the real underscore G Warner, Griffin Warner. I am by myself today. Scott Seidenberg is my co-host. Normally, he's been super hot lately, so make sure you check out his stuff on Twitter, on Pregame, all those sort of places. But he and I had schedules cross a little bit tonight, so it's just me. But I'm going to be going through the entire Monday Major League Baseball cards, a little bit shorter than normal. Unfortunately, as we go into the week, the Monday cards were pretty good for a lot of the season, but are starting to dry out a little bit. So we'll go through all of those, try to give a recap on the teams that are playing and kind of speak a little bit more about what happened to them this weekend. Of course, going to give a pregame.com promo code plus a best bet end of show. So stick around. All lines quoted in this podcast, courtesy of betonline.ag, my favorite place to get my bets down early. Reduced use is offered on almost every game you want to bet right up until game time. Please follow the link found in the podcast description to fund your account. Use the promo code GW50. Receive a 50% match bonus up to $1,000. Also want to mention my Patreon, patreon.com/thereal_G Warner. Good spot to go. Plus, we'll be talking about my pregame.com stuff as well. Check me out on all those platforms. Plenty of places to get my leans and plays going into each day. So I'm going to start in the Major League Baseball card. I go in rotation order. Scott does usually in the order of first pitch, but I'm stuck in my ways. So I hope you all can tolerate that. And I'll start with that first matchup on Monday, and that is the Milwaukee Brewers visit the New York Mets. Colin Ray and Justin Verlander. Currently, Verlander a minus 172 favorite. Over under is 8.5, a little bit more juice to the under. And I think that the number is juiced to the under based on Milwaukee's lack of offense. They had a good series this weekend, winning 2 out of 3 against the Guardians. I actually backed them Friday and Saturday. Thought about doing Sunday as well, and they blew a pretty big lead with Corbin Burns on the mound, blowing it himself, which was surprising, but they did get a win in extra innings and really hadn't used a ton of their bullpen this weekend to secure a series win. But the Milwaukee Brewers are half a game back in the the NL National League Central, but have really not been able to hit the ball at all. And that's a big problem because they're going on the road to Justin Verlander, who has been very shaky, looking more like a 40-year-old than we were expecting, especially as he won the AL Cy Young last year in Houston. But we're looking at the Mets. They had another awful collapse today. Buck Showalter a little testy with reporters after the game. And it's tough when you get asked. I'm sure emotions are still running pretty high right after game ended, after you blew another big lead. And I think it's a really big problem is this bullpen. We've been talking about it all year on this show. And it hasn't really changed. Unfortunately, the Mets have spent a ton of money in payroll on their team, but they lost their closer to a really freak injury in the World Baseball Classic, and that was a really big problem. So they haven't been able to figure that out. They have no names in eighth inning of 3-run games where you should have your highest leverage relievers, especially when things get ugly. So things just haven't gone very well for the Mets, and there's a reason why they're sitting in such a really poor position, like I think in the teens games back of the Atlanta Braves, who won't stop winning, which is also problematic. But it honestly looks like the Mets are a long shot to even get a wild card, but still a huge, gigantic favorite. Colin Ray, I think it's Colin, forgive me if it's not. But anyway, Ray's strategy and really he's a pitch to contact guy, which is not what you want to be in 2023 Major League Baseball. He's had, I feel like, a pretty good set of outings this year and has not really been hit very hard. The guys that are in the bigs that aren't striking people out and are pitching to contact usually get there and stay there, or at least hang out or hang around as long as they can keep soft contact coming. The Mets lineup has not been great this year. They did just deal Eduardo Escobar to try to then, I guess, buy in more to their younger players. And they should have been doing that from the beginning, and we're starting to. But the Mets lineup still has been a little bit shaky. They were really quiet when they lost Pete Alonso to an injury, but he kind of got rushed back. We'll see if that has any long-term effect. But Lindor's been hitting really low batting average, but with a lot more power, which I feel like is him kind of trying to, I think, cover the losses of the polar bear when Alonso went down. But I think just one of those things where he's trading average for power. I think because he knows and is feeling the pressure that the Mets need it. In terms of where I want to go with this one, I mean, I feel like the Mets are too big of a favorite, but it's not enough necessarily for me to want to back a Ray arm that I don't really trust a ton on a also with an offense that I don't trust a lot. I think the Brewers are a team to back against other really poor offenses. And I think there's enough of a discrepancy between the Mets hitters and the Brewers that it's just not for me. Next, I'll move because that's our lone National League game of the day. There is, I guess, College World Series if you're into that, but there's still plenty of good baseball. So don't turn this off yet. Just there's only one National League game. We have the Detroit Tigers. They're visiting the Texas Rangers. Matthew Boyd at Andrew Heaney. Currently, Heaney minus 191, nearly $2 favorite at home. Over under is 9, slightly juiced the under. Matt Boyd has had a pretty good start to the year, big prospect in the past, never really delivered, and has kind of been stuck in what do we do with him? He's not really good enough to be a starter to get 5 or 6 innings out of him. But he's also not a 1-inning reliever. So that's been troubling, problematic. He's not really a bat misser. He's kind of the Colin Ray type from the last game. Again, if I'm getting that first name correct. He's had some good outings this year and honestly has looked like he's almost worth trusting for fantasy reasons, but I think he's still a fair amount off the radar for me there. Andrew Heaney is a really tough. I think I was quoted earlier by a friend of mine, Rangers fan, who I think might be making an appearance the next time that it's just me on this podcast for at least some comedy and hilarity. But I think someone that pays a lot of attention to the Texas Rangers. And anyway, I mentioned that Heaney's about as trustworthy as the weather, and I think that's fair. He's got good swing and miss upside. He's a modern 2023 pitcher that could have really good success. He's just never been able to harness everything, be consistent. Injuries have plagued his career, which is nothing new for a pitcher, but ultimately I think has let him down and has kind of put him in a position where we don't really know what we're going to expect from him every time he's out there. So when he needs a $2 favorite almost, it does seem pricey, but the Rangers bullpen has been better. It kind of melted down today. It looked like they were a little bit thin and used a player I hadn't seen this year in the 8th inning, which then turned a 3-2 lead in trouble to a 4-3 deficit and an eventual loss. And really a poor series for Texas because they won the first one in extra innings, lost to a single run because they were shut out on Saturday, and then blew a lead in the 8th inning, bottom of the 8th, when they were leading a multi-run lead up to 4-2, I think it was. And that's problematic for Texas, and that's been their issue. Their bullpen had been better for the last month or so, but there's still a lot of questions in that bullpen. Bruce Bochy, their manager, has been a bullpen wonderkind. I guess he's not a kin because he's an old man, but anyway, he's been great with bullpens in the past, but has not been the case this year. And I think it's going to be one of the Achilles heel that Texas should have been working on by now, but they haven't done it yet. The Rays have been, their biggest competitor, I think, to win the pennant. They've been acquiring relievers left and right, and Texas just seems to be stuck with maybe the amount of money they spent on their offense, and that's something they don't want to go too far. But I feel like there are players in their system that are not really looking like they're going to make this team. The time to make a run is now, and I think you need to start looking for better relief help. So you're not giving games away on the road in the Bronx to one of the worst Yankee lineups that we've seen in memory. But as for this number, again, a gigantic home favorite. I would expect Texas to get back, should be pretty motivated after really losing 2 close games and dropping a series in the Bronx against a Yankees team that they're better than. But looking at the Detroit side, I feel like it's hard to really give a good estimate on what Matthew Boyd will do. I feel like the range of outcomes are extremely wide for him. But then even if you get into the bullpen, you have Alex Lang, who's been their closer, but has been kind of appearing in the high leverage situations in the 7th and 8th innings, and that hasn't gone great for him. And then the remainder of that bullpen is not something I really want to trust. So I think if anything, I maybe want to look over 9 in this one. It's a really key number in baseball because you get the 5-4 finishes, and that's a lot of times where the number seems to kind of dance around. But I think at the flat 9 right now, I'll lean over and I'll move on to the next and second and last American League game for this Monday, and that is Chicago White Sox and Dylan Cease visiting the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim and Reed Detmers. Currently, Detmers minus 128 home favorite. The over-under is 8.5, and two pitchers that have really, really high strikeout upside, which is exactly what you want to be in the year of our Lord 2023. Dylan Cease has kind of turned around a really tough start to his year where his slider wasn't getting over the plate enough. And so pretty much everyone were just sitting on fastballs. And when you are a Major League Baseball hitter, you're one of the best in the world at hitting a ball that's traveling at you at 95 miles an hour. It doesn't really matter how fast it is. If it's straight, you can hit it. And Cease was really struggling. He had a couple starts against the Rays when they were really hot, so that didn't go great for him in terms of luck and timing of that sort. But he's been better lately. The bullpen behind him is still very questionable. Liam Hendriks doesn't look like he's going to be back till after the All-Star breaks. That means at the very least, the White Sox are down a closer and have really struggled to figure out who's going to take that position over. But they honestly have trouble in middle relief, every part of relief as well. When Joe Kelly is your most reliable reliever at times, that's a really scary thing, considering windows outside of his house are in danger when he's throwing in the COVID offseason. So on the other side, Reed Detmers, he's had a no-hitter. He's had huge strikeout numbers in the minors. Hasn't really delivered on that so much in the bigs. He's throwing harder. He's got better velocity, apparently higher RPMs on his sliders and breaking pitches and things of that nature. So there's a lot of things pointing in the right direction for Reed Detmers. Of course, he's got Shohei Ohtani on his team as well. A tough series in Colorado with a blown Friday night, I think, and then winning 25-1 on Saturday, and then losing the rubber game on Sunday, outscoring the Rockies by 20 runs, but ended up losing a series. That's not great. Angels are still the same Angels. They got really great top end talent, but not a lot more than that. So I don't know what to say about them necessarily. It does feel like they're fairly cheap at minus 128 at the current number at BetOnline. So I'll give you the Angels as my interest in this one. I feel like also under 8.5 looks interesting to me. Since there's a good chance that if this one is tight late, pretty small spread, you might want to look at a first 5 under to avoid that White Sox bullpen. I do feel like that helps the Angels, though, where a bad White Sox bullpen honestly makes the Angels even stronger later in the game. Moving now to the interleague, I'll go to Cincinnati visiting Baltimore, two teams playing way above expectations, but the Orioles did it last year and are kind of doing it the same way this year. The Reds just lost. They had a 12-game win streak snapped, but that's what happens when you're playing the Atlanta Braves, maybe the best team in baseball. The Reds, though, I mean, they're going to score a ton of runs, which is really not what Baltimore does. So there's a lot, I think, to talk about in this one. I'll start with the line. Williamson for the Reds at Cole Irvin for Baltimore. Currently, Williamson Cole Irvin at home is a minus 134 favorite. The over-under is 9.5. Juiced very heavily to the over. It looks like it's going to climb to 10, which is kind of surprising because Baltimore is an under ballpark now that they've built the Great Wall of Baltimore in left field. The Baltimore bullpen is also lights out, but the real question is really with the starter with Irvin, who came up with the Oakland Athletics and had some really good numbers, but ultimately there was a lot of questions on how he was putting up those big numbers, and a lot of it seemed like luck. He reverted to the mean and is going to be throwing a lot of straight fastballs without a ton of velocity from the left-handed side of the mound. And that's going to be problematic for the Reds who tee off on those things. They do a lot of platooning to the Reds, so it's a good chance that some of the good lefties in that lineup might not be in there on Monday night. But the Reds, have been playing so well, despite not having a great bullpen, and they're probably going to see where they sit towards the trade deadline and see what they need to add. They've got a lot of young talent, including in the minors, but I'm not really sure what they're planning to do just yet, because I don't think the Reds were expecting to compete, but that division's been so bad, and they're leading it as we speak or as I record right now. I don't have a ton on Williamson, but ultimately the Orioles offense is definitely weaker than Cincinnati's. I think my interest here, I don't love the bullpen situations because I feel like the Reds are an underdog late, as they would be on the road for sure. But when you compare the bullpens, it gets even worse than that. So I think if you're interested in the Reds, you probably want to look into playing them in the first 5. And if you like the Orioles, I don't know if I'm advocating playing a minus 134, but I do think if you're playing the Reds, you're going to need them to take a pretty big lead, and a big enough one for their bullpen to hang on. I trust their closer. Buck Farmer's been pretty good in the 8th inning as well. But I'm not sure that I really want to back Cincinnati here. I think it's a good test for him, and I do have some money on the Reds to win the division that I jumped in after seeing them in the lead and still being a 4-1 odds, but long way to go there. And it's just something to root for, I think, for the rest of the year. Next, we'll go to Minnesota and Sonny Gray visiting Atlanta and Spencer Strider. This is a huge pitching matchup and honestly looked like one of the best ones in baseball. It would have been if you had chalked to this or if we had this matchup 3 weeks ago. Sonny Gray has not been the same since. The Twins have been really careful with his pitch counts, but I'll go into that in a little bit more in a second. Currently, Strider, nearly a $2 favorite, minus 198 at home in Atlanta. The over-under is 8.5, juiced pretty heavily to the under. Sonny Gray, he just hasn't really been throwing a lot of pitches. He did in his last start against the Red Sox, which was kind of back and forth, went behind, then kept allowing the Red Sox to tie the game. And then eventually went to extra innings, and surprise, surprise, I did not win an extra innings bet because I've had an awful run there this season. But Strider had some pretty weak starts himself, even not against great competition. The Tigers hit him pretty hard on the road in a day game start, which is usually a great time for a great arm like Spencer Strider to mow that team down. But it's pretty substantial to see Spencer Strider, a nearly $2 favorite, to such a good arm like Sonny Gray. There's questions about the Minnesota bullpen, though. So Gray, I think why this line is so big, it's bigger than I would make it for sure. And I think I'm interested in Minnesota and a potential run line play. I do worry about that. Road run lines are good, I think, because there's a good chance that the home team will only get 8 at bats. If they win the game, they could be winning by 1 and you win your bet. You don't have to worry about it. Also, you have the walk-off potential where if it's not going over the wall, you are going to win your bet simply off of a single run loss. I guess the other side, though, is that if Sonny Gray is going to go 5 innings is probably his maximum. I haven't seen him go 6 in a while. He's been getting pulled at like 80 pitches when he closes an inning out. So I'm not expecting him to go to 100. I think he did his last start. We'll see if he bounces back from that. But even so, with Pablo Lopez, or excuse me, another Lopez on the IL dealing with some anxiety or stress related issues, that's really put a hole in the Minnesota bullpen. So they're trying to figure out who's going to close games besides Duran, who plays and pitches sometimes 2 innings at a time. But surrounding him, I mean, Griffin Jackson's been pretty good. He's got a great name. I'll give him that. But he's not someone I'm really that reliant upon. His numbers have been good. So maybe he deserves a little bit more respect. But that's the problem with Minnesota, is that they've got a lot of big pitching questions, and they're facing I think the best lineup in baseball. It's probably arguable between Atlanta and Texas, but right now I think Atlanta's is the strongest to me because 1 through 9, they are all huge, huge threats. I mean, you could say similar things about Texas as well, but we've already covered them. So I'm going to stay here. I think for value players, I'm not sure the last time I've seen Sonny Gray this big of an underdog, even when he was in Oakland. I feel like it's probably worth a shot if you're into trying to take a long shot on this card. Certainly it looks like the most attractive $2 favorite to fade, even though Atlanta is one of the best teams. They're facing a pretty good one, and a Minnesota team that's built for power. They strike out a lot, though, and I think Strider, maybe an over on his strikeout prop might be a good idea if you're into those type of things. And last but not least, I'll move to the Washington Nationals, continuing their West Coast road trip, going from San Diego up to Seattle. We got Trevor Williams on the bump for the Washington Nationals, and he's visiting Luis Castillo, what should be a very low-scoring game. Washington, they've been hitting the ball fairly well this year. They've got big questions in their bullpen, but Luis Castillo should be able to keep the Washington lineup pretty quiet, and the Seattle bullpen is awesome behind him. So I got big questions. Current number, I'll give it to you now, is the Mariners minus 245. The over-under is 8, very juiced to the under. Might see a 7.5 before this first pitch is thrown. But Trevor Williams, I mean, he's a pitch to contact guy. There's a reason why he's bounced around a bunch of teams and hasn't really looked great in the process. He can keep this game close and hang in there because Seattle has really not delivered on. I had pretty high expectations on them coming into the year, especially after how well they played in the playoffs last year. But I'm not really sure I'm believing in what their lineup has done this year. They turned it on after a really slow start last year, but I feel like it hasn't necessarily happened here. They've had some big scoring outbursts like they did on Thursday against Domingo Germán, who just is completely lost as a pitcher right now. And then also scored a ton of runs against Baltimore the next night, I think after a rain delay, but then went back to being pretty quiet, had a lead today, conceded that, and then were never able to get back in the game. Close game, but still a loss in Baltimore nonetheless. So seeing them as a 240 minus 245 favorite is pretty big. Washington has just done, beat, I think, San Diego in 2 out of 3, I want to say. They might have had a 4-game series, but I think Washington took 2 of them against a San Diego team that's been playing pretty well. Washington's not really had a good run lately. I feel like they're competitive and they're in all these games. So another situation where a dog of more than 2-1, in this case, it looks like the biggest dog on the card. Never a terrible idea if you want to avoid taking that shot that they have to win at that plus 220, instead looking at a run line, which should get you a insurance and a winning bet on a single run loss. If that's how you expect this one to go. I think Castillo likely keeps his low scoring, which also I think impacts and plays into playing a run line on an underdog on the road, because you don't want a ton of runs being scored in that type of situation when you really want it to end 1-0. But we'll see what happens with that one. And then I think now it's time I can get through some promo codes to save you all some money. Thanks for tuning in. Of course, if you're new to pregame or you don't have an account just yet, go sign up. You get $25 free just for signing up. It takes 90 seconds and you can take advantage of being a site member. You get access to the forums, plus, of course, all our handicapping that's out there. I have picks in college football, soccer stuff. Of course, we'll be having baseball coming out daily. And you can use that free $25 to get a pick that's usually behind closed doors. Got to shout out my co-host Scott Seidenberg. He's had a great run lately. 4-1. So on 16 graded plays with that one push, up over 20 units, 21.5 through his last 7 days. So stay hot, Scotty. I know he's recording another podcast kind of right now as we're talking. So good for him, and hopefully keeps that up. I feel like I've been doing pretty well lately, but baseball is a grind. There's a lot of wins, a lot of losses that are coming, but that's part of the game. And thank you, of course, everyone who's been listening to this podcast, all my Patreon patrons. They've been great, keeping up every day. It's a long grind, and I realize I'm doing a lot of work for y'all, but it's also a game that we're doing together if you're on the train with me. So for the promo code here for pregame and another 20% off, use American20. So as we get towards July 4th, I think this is mainly due to the All-Star break coming up, but use the promo code American20, good for 7 days from the podcast release. So you got until, I guess, the 2nd or so of July, but get in there before Patriots Day and all those sort of, well, I guess that's different day, but before Independence Day, use the promo code American20, good for 20% off for all listeners of this MLB podcast. So get in there, do that. I'm going to now go through, and I think I already mentioned my Patreon, patreon.com, just _G Warner. It's a good spot to get my leans and honestly, day-to-day updates. It's a little bit less formal. So pregame, I pretty much put my picks out each night. The Patreon side of things, it's a little bit more affordable, but I'm going throughout the day and updating what I'm talking about. So might be worth checking into. I highly suggest it. I think anyone that's been on there has been pretty happy with how it's been going. And I'm, of course, always open to adjusting how I do things just to make sure that everyone is getting what you're looking for. But anyway, check that out if you're interested. And now I guess it's time for me to get into the best bet. So for this episode, so this is RJ Bell's Dream Preview with the real _G Warner. And for my best bet on this episode, Monday, June 26th, I'm going to go with the slight favorite at home. I feel like the Angels just seem to be too cheap to me, just based on a bullpen advantage. Plus, I think Reed Detmers can outduel Dylan Cease as well. You got the Shohei factor, which is always something you want. If he's not in this lineup, that might change things a little bit. But currently, the Angels minus 128 at BetOnline. I'll lay that number with Reed Detmers. I think he's a pretty solid pitcher. He's got great swing and miss stuff, just like his adversary in Dylan Cease. But like I said, I trust the bullpen more. They got last at bats. I think they're a favorite late. They're a favorite at the beginning. So minus 128 seems a little bit cheap to me. And I think it might climb before this one, the first pitch is thrown. So check that out. Throw that in there. Angels minus 128. And let's go make some money on this Monday. And that'll do it for this episode of RJ Bell's Dream Preview. Thanks, of course, for listening, especially putting up with me. It's a solo episode tonight, but we'll be back on Thursday, Scott and I. Also want to make sure that everyone is if you're not subscribed on all the various platforms, please do so you know that we're in your feed right away. You make sure you don't miss an episode while you're on your commute to work or, maybe at your kitchen table, teaching your kids how to bet at 6 years old or something like that. Got to start them early. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. This has been RJ Bell's Dream Preview, MLB edition.